For those of you I've never met before, my name is Elka Edwards and I'm the founder of Ivy House. I have the great opportunity today to not be your main speaker because we have a brilliant cast on our panel, really, really wonderful. So I just wanted to take a few moments to let you know who we are, what we do, why we do it, and then I will hand over to Kate Lander, our CEO, who's going to host the panel this afternoon. So for those of you that don't know us, it's worth knowing that actually Ivy House is a set of a team of senior leadership coaches, developers, and we spent probably over 20 years working at the most senior levels in business with CEOs, directors, SLTs, ELTs. And it was amazing. We worked with some incredible companies, some incredible people, over 37 different countries, with about 40% of the FTSE 100. And in that time, you know, we realized something, and it changed our lives, actually. We realized that there are a set of skills that, when mastered, make a game-changing difference to how our lives turn out and the kind of leaders we become. And having realized this, something kept bugging us. And the thing that kept bugging us is, why is this learning only available to the most senior people? So that led us to change everything. We sold our last company, which was Blue Sky, and we set up Ivy House. And now we still work with a range of amazing organizations, and we work with their emerging leaders, their future leaders, their graduates, their apprenticeships. But I think it's really important to note that this isn't an age thing. We've had people on our programs as young as 19 and as old. I can say this because it's virtually my age, as 55, in fact, maybe even older than that. This is all about mindset. These are the people that we know are going to lead our organizations into the future. So that's what we do. And we have a range of different programs that we offer both in-house and as open programs for organizations that believe leadership needs to be better, actually. So the other thing we did, which we're also really, really excited about, is in September, of last year, what year are we in? Last year, we launched a program to schools that works from year 10 to upper 6. That was piloted in these schools, you can see, and then in this September, it's rolling out through a whole load more schools across the country. So if any of you are calling in from schools or are connected to any schools that believe that we need to put leadership and life skills at the heart of education, please get in touch with us. So what are these skills that I keep mentioning? These are them. We call them the Ivy House 7, and they are the skills we believe that are fundamental to enabling us to both become extraordinary leaders and lead extraordinary lives. And every single one of our programs is built on these 7 skills. And they manifest in different ways, from our flagship master program to Life Leader, which is a program that can go across your organization, putting these skills in. So the other job I get to do today, which I just want to mention before I hand over to Kate, is I get to be Willy Wonka for the afternoon. One of the things we do in our events when we meet in lovely London hotels is we have a golden ticket, which we always plant in a bar of chocolate that sits in your bag. Sadly, we cannot give you that bar of chocolate right now, but we can give you the opportunity to win a golden ticket. And in fact, because we're virtual, we haven't had to pay for the swanky London hotel. We're going to be drawing 2 golden tickets this afternoon. One gives people a totally free place on our master program. So that's an 8-month program with incredible group work, networking, working with amazing coaches one-on-one and in groups, access to our mentor community. The price when we were doing that face-to-face was £8,000. It's now £4,000 because we're running that program virtually, but we're giving you a free place to offer to anyone that you believe is the right kind of person to go on that program. And the second thing we're going to be doing is drawing a ticket for our Life Leader program as well, which gives someone else another opportunity to access this amazing learning. So on that note, I am going to stop my share and I'm going to hand over to Kate Lander, who is our CEO. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Elke, and a very warm welcome. Well, it is a very warm welcome, actually, isn't it? Well, or at least it is, hopefully, for most people. And I think even in sunny Scotland, it's a warm welcome. So, could I just now do the tech bit and ask the 4 panelists to unmute their microphones? I think everybody else, it's always nicer for us on the panel to look out and see some real faces in inverted commas. So please do keep your cameras on. Always good to see the odd child, dog, husband, wife, or other family member drift in and out as well. So keeps us on our toes. But if we can ask you just keep your mics off, that'd be brilliant. So without further ado, let's get started with the panel. And we've got a brilliant lineup today. On our panel today, we've got 4 lovely people. We've got Gary Sampson, who is Regional Director at Nationwide. So there's Gary waving. We've got Richard Cross, who is Chief People Officer at L'Oreal for UK and Ireland. We've got Alistair Cumming, Head of Learning and Development for Lidl UK. And Jason Lloyd, Future Skills Lead at BT Enterprise. And I think what strikes me straight away is always feel like embarrassing them giving their big job titles, but also the range of industries there, you know, and some things that we've all pretty much relied on, I think, over the last couple of months as well, with the supermarkets, the technology side of things, obviously finance, and Elke's beauty products, as she's just highlighted with her roots as well. So all good stuff. Well, look, what we're going to do today in the panel is really aim to get you some insights, some thoughts, reflections. We're going to start off with a little look backwards. We're then going to really move into thinking about what we're all going to do in this situation. So I'm going to start off and asking the panelists to have a slight moment of reflection. And for those participants in the audience, you also may remember that we asked you some questions when you signed up for this, okay? So there is no such thing as a free webinar when you come to Ivy House. We got you all to fill in those questions. So what I'm going to do is to just reveal some of the answers. With the wonders of technology, I'm hoping that's working. Elke, can you just give me a nod? Brilliant. So the first question, or one of the first questions we asked you was, what are you struggling with? What are the challenges that your team department is facing right now? To avoid really just ticking every single box, we did ask you to pick out the top 3. That can reveal that the top one was balancing short and long-term plans. Probably not a great surprise. And something struck me the other day when I read in the papers that many of us have probably heard of Davos, the big event, the World Economic Forum that goes on in Switzerland in January. Coronavirus was not on the agenda. Okay, it was a breakfast discussion and there was some off-the-record chat, but it wasn't on the agenda. So I think we can all feel that we've been in this for such a long time, but January 2020, the best brains in the world leaders weren't even talking about it. So that's what we're having to contend with. It's not surprising. We're struggling, challenging with those short and long-term plans. Managing remote teams. Slightly ironic, isn't it, that 40% of you said that, and we're on a remote webinar over Zoom. So no great surprises there. And then I think that evolving and redesigning strategy, this has had a fundamental impact. And I know our panel have got some great examples of that on their businesses. I will just, though, share the 2 next in our list, because a bit like the Eurovision Song Contest, this was an incredibly close run contest, and 34% came in with staff engagement and motivation, and 33% was well-being. And I know so many of our clients have spoken to us about that, and in our business as well. It's really making sure that our teams are okay. So that was the input from the audience here today. I want to turn to our panel now, and I think it's really important that we do just take a moment to reflect on what we have all done and what we've been up to. So my question, I'd just like to ask all the panelists, I guess kind of, what's been happening for you? What's been happening for you and your businesses We obviously want to look forward, so we're all going to keep this to just a couple of minutes each. But any of those things resonate with you? Have you seen different things, a different focus? And just because he's left of my head on my screen anyway, I'm going to jump in with Richard to go first.
Okay, thanks very much, Kate. So I guess there's probably kind of three sections to the answers I would have, and the first one almost as a precursor for me. I think it's really important, just to your point, to remember how quickly this has changed in how short a time. And I was having a conversation with some of my team and presenting in a town hall that we had at L'Oreal. And as a preparation for that, I just kind of went back and Googled what was on the front page of the papers at the end of February. And the stuff that was on there was Bernie Sanders is going to be the Democrat nominee. We had kind of Storm Harry, I think it was, hitting the UK. We had things like Prince Harry and Meghan leaving the country. And I was saying to people when I read that, it was like looking at something from the history pages. It just didn't resonate with me. I couldn't connect with it, even though it was such a short period of time. So I think, when you look back to there, and now we've got certainly all of Western Europe has been locked down for a number of months. Even the concept of lockdown, I mean, like, what even is that? If you'd ask somebody at the end of February, you've got a prime minister that's been kind of close to death and has left the country without a leader for a period of time. And that's no kind of critique of the leadership style. It's just the fact, it's the sort of stuff that would be far-fetched in a movie. So I think there's a bit of us kind of cutting ourselves some slack just of where we've come from and what we're living right now. And I guess kind of the second and third point, the role that I play is primarily an executive of the L'Oreal UKI business, and then secondly with a people specialism. So, what's happened to us? I guess there's probably three big things. So one, our route to market has been massively disrupted. So we have 4 divisions within our organisation: a luxury division regularly sold through department stores, and we have a professional salon division where we sell through hair salons, etc. And as you might imagine, looking at me, I'm very jealous of Elka showing her roots, because just the thought of having roots in itself is like a great idea to me. So we have those 2 divisions. The route to market has just been, as you can imagine, everybody's been on lockdown, everywhere's been closed, so that's been a massive downturn for us. The flip side is we then have 2 other divisions. Our consumer product division that primarily sells through large retail multiples, so Tesco, Sainsbury's, those sorts of areas, or through pharmacies and medical outlets. And as you'd imagine, both of those parts of the business have gone through the roof, right? So it's just a huge churn that we've seen, and just trying to get our heads around that. As part of that, we've also seen kind of e-com go through the roof. I was speaking to somebody today in Asia Pac this morning, and they were talking about how wonderful and how mature e-com is in Western Europe. And I just fundamentally disagree. I think if you look at the need right now, that shines a spotlight on e-com in Western Europe, and I think we've got a long way to go. So there's all of those things going on from a commercial perspective. I guess if I put my people hat on, there's probably a couple of things that I've seen. So one, it sounds a little bit strange to say, but I think we've really seen what inclusion means for the first time. We talk a lot, especially in kind of people industries, about D&I. For me, it's much more about the I than the D. Where are we trying to get to? Frankly, you want everybody you're involved with to feel absolutely brilliant about them, and then play from a 10 every single day. Everything else, in my mind, is a step towards that. But the reality is, when you're all in an office and you're all wearing similar clothes and you all sit on similar desks and you all write presentations with the same template, we're all pushed into this kind of still into a template. And for me, I really had a moment of realization over the last few weeks. One was on a call with one of my team where they said, "Oh wow, I really like the art that you've got on your wall." I was in a different room at the time. But it really made me think, like, well, I've never spoken to this stuff about these guys. And then I was on a call with my colleagues across Western Europe last week, and somebody did the same. I heard them saying, "Oh, wow, you're really into that artist." I am too. And it just really made me think, for the first time, we're seeing whether people are having a tough time or an easy time. They've got kids or they haven't got kids. They've got a dog that bites at their legs. They're into a particular type of art. And, I think anybody that says this period of time is a great opportunity, frankly, I cut them very short shrift, because we shouldn't kid ourselves that this is anything other than a horrific period for the whole of humankind. But there are definite insights to be had. And, I'll stop there. But some of my team coined the phrase for me a couple of weeks ago, that we're all in the same storm, we're just in a different boat. And it really kind of stopped me in my tracks. It was like, wow, that's a really brilliant way of putting this. It's like everybody is experiencing their own reality, and somebody who's having a really tough time at home with their kids, there might be someone else who's having a wonderful time bonding with their kids, but we shouldn't project our usual orthodoxy. So that's kind of the current swirl we're in at L'Oreal with all of those things.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Richard, for sharing. Alistair, can I come to you now? I mean, obviously, I guess supermarkets and the toilet paper was one of the first things to hit the headline as we approach lockdown. What's been going on for you?
There's plenty of toilet paper. That's the first thing. Yeah, I mean, I think you talk about the newspaper and when the headlines hit. It hit for the supermarket industry probably 2 to 3 weeks before lockdown. And that was when the panic buying started. So we had to be extremely reactionary, particularly for my department in L&D and HR, extremely reactionary to what was happening. People were saying it was like Christmas, but it wasn't like Christmas, because at Christmas, everyone buys turkey, Brussels sprouts, and whatever else. So you can order for that because it's the same year on year. All of a sudden, pasta was flying out, toilet paper was disappearing, and the shelves were emptying, but these were shelves that are usually full and fairly low selling products. So that whole thing had to go on its head. We had to make sure that we had people who were picking in the warehouse and getting deliveries into the warehouse. And clearly we're not geared up to that to the extent that was required. So there was a massive recruitment campaign to get people in to do that. You've got to train them up, they've got to be compliant. And that was just in the logistics side of the business. And then obviously when the lockdown hit and people were not coming out, suddenly the shelves weren't quite so bare. And people weren't coming in the stores, but also we had sickness where our staff were going off. So we actually had to bring in an additional 3,500 people on short-term contracts, 4-week contracts to get us through the initial period, panic buying, and then into lockdown and sickness. And that was a huge challenge. And you know, when people are being furloughed, we were able to take on staff who'd been furloughed from various other industries and give them those opportunities. And it might surprise you, but for the 3,500, 4,000 jobs that we had on offer, we had nearly 90,000 applications for those short-term contracts. And I think that's quite an impactful figure of how things have changed, that for those tasks, so many people needed to have some hope and some form of role at the end of it. The business has then gone through a complete roller coaster. You could always say your busiest days were a Friday and a Saturday. We went through a stage, the busiest day was Monday and Wednesday. It's now going back to the traditional busy days at weekends, and people are going back to doing their normal shop. But interestingly, I read just this week on some customer data that where customers previously would put price and quality at the top of their list as to why they use a particular supermarket, now what's top of the list is safety. So people are very conscious, and that's something which this industry has now got to react to. Wider aisles as well as the cheaper prices. Because what's going to happen at the end of it when we go into recession is that we're going to have to be reactionary to that as well. So it is a real roller coaster ride that we're facing. But certainly in Lidl, we've managed to come through that and are responding really well. Our staff have been amazing. I'm sure they are for everyone else. And things that you didn't expect that your staff would do quite easily because they've always done it that way. Suddenly they're happy to try something new, and that's a real positive.
I have to say, Alistair, I don't think I've ever seen a group of HR heads turn quite so much or show some brilliant expressions. If only we got a screenshot at the moment you mentioned 3.5 new hires and 90,000 applicants. I think it was incredible just watching people's expressions, and exactly why we asked people to keep the cameras on. That's brilliant, thanks. Jason, I mean, obviously sort of from a technology point, it's busy time as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, everything that everyone else has said resonates, but for us in BT, it's very much been a tale of two halves, really. So you know, obviously communications technology, broadband, all of that, you know, is kind of essential really to keeping UK PLC going. So we've seen a huge explosion from that end of our business, and you know, to the point that Alistair was making about hiring new staff. Already before COVID, we were in massive ramping up of our field engineering division to support the rollout of fibre and Broadband Britain and all of those things. And that's kind of continued at the pace, but it's been quite a complex task. If you can imagine having to redesign all of the onboarding and the induction for that, and how do you take, you know, training for engineers that need to climb poles and go down holes and do all of those technical things and virtualize it. So there's been a few sleepless nights in our L&D team trying to do that, but to be fair, they've done really well, and we've kept that recruitment going, no gaps in that. But at the other end of the spectrum, we've got all of our high street shops, so the BTEE high street shops, of which there's you know, several hundred across the UK, and virtually overnight, of course, they closed. So we've had a huge reskilling and redeployment task on our hands to think, well, okay, how can we take those several thousand people, because we haven't furloughed anyone, you know, we've redeployed and reskilled and moved them around into, you know, contact centres or engineering world, or any other part of our business that was affected and impacted. So that's probably been our biggest challenge in terms of managing that process and migrating them into different roles, which from my perspective, learning, development and skills has kind of drawn on our expertise very strongly. But I just wanted to pick up on something that Richard said really about that whole kind of cultural side of this as well, because that resonated so strongly with me. We'd not long before all of this crisis began, we'd actually rolled out a new social media platform within BT, Workplace, which is a Facebook product. And we'd had quite a lot of resistance actually from our people in terms of, do we really want this? Can we really see the value and the benefit from this? And almost overnight, it's suddenly become the place where not only do we all go to share and engage from a work perspective, but, you know, similar to what you were saying, Richard, you know, that is our platform now, and our place to, you know, talk and share and have virtual drinks with people, and, you know, use that technology in a way that's really brought us closer together. We have things like coffee roulettes. So you'll have a virtual opportunity, and it goes into a roulette, and you can kind of jump on a call, and you don't know who you're going to meet. It's a great way to kind of meet and greet other people in the company and keep that engagement going. So yeah, I think lots has changed, lots hasn't changed, but it feels like we're a much closer business as a result of this. And I think, you know, the point that you raised, Richard, is really, you know, the same here. We are not, you know, underestimating the terrible nature of this crisis, but there are also some big positives for us within BT in terms of how we're responding to it and how it's bringing us closer together.
That's brilliant. No, it's Jason. I do like your coffee roulette idea, and if anybody, if anyone else wants to share some great things down in the group chat, then please do, and we can make sure that they get captured, because I know we're always all looking for new ideas on that. Gary, I mean, obviously Jason just touched there on the impact with branches, and he touched on his branch network, and obviously with Nationwide, that's I'm sure a big part of your business. What's been going on for you?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I'll try not to sort of labour some of the points that have already been made, but I guess ultimately the challenge was going from, in the weeks before lockdown, we had a heightened demand for service in our branches. So our branches became very full with the types of members that actually were being advised to stay at home. So elderly, more vulnerable, wanting access to cash, perhaps didn't do digital or mobile banking, or use contactless. So actually, in the couple of weeks before, when all the messages were starting to talk about not going out, we were making provisions for specific hours in that to have more elderly members having specific access to the branches. into what is completely alien for us as a building society, where it's all about member service, to actually go into a period of restricting access to service. So restricting the types of transactions we could do in a branch, restricting the opening hours, all of that designed towards to protect our colleagues. You know, so as let's not forget, they are all my branch team members are key workers, but we've had in this time period a 70% increase in verbal and abusive behaviour towards them, because of members of the public that just want to do what they want to do on that particular day. Bearing in mind, we went to actually restricting access to the branch to certain numbers of customers at a time, and the kind of behaviour and that you would get at the doors to let people in. So whilst there are other businesses that unfortunately have had to be closed for them, actually they've been able to try and get their head around, well, what are others doing so that we can manage the flow of customers in a branch? We were having to do that kind of on the hoof. So there was that particular challenge. Out of that, I guess it's the reacting to the demands and accelerating things that we'd always wanted to do, but now actually were imperatives that we started to do. So things like within a 6-day period, we managed to introduce a really slick and easy online process for payment holidays. Bearing in mind, we've had in excess of 200,000 requests for payment holidays on mortgages. We had to shift as a building society, so we've got 17,000 or so people work at Nationwide Building Society. We had certainly absolutely less than 1,000 people that worked from home prior to the pandemic, to now there are 12,000 people working and enabled to work from home. And that was enabled fairly quickly, certainly quickly for Nationwide. And then one of the goals that we've always wanted to do is around virtualising our branch contact centre and digital servicing. So all our frontline touch points with members. And actually we've achieved that over the last, within the first 4 weeks of the lockdown. We achieved that by having contact centre calls being answered. We're now answering something like 55,000 calls a week in branches that would normally getting answered in contact centres. Bearing in mind, we've had to restrict access into our contact centres to 30% occupancy to maintain social distancing. So those are a number of the challenges, but actually out of that, it has just accelerated our digital transformation and things that we wanted to achieve through necessity.
Yeah. I think the thing that strikes me as all of those answers come out is number one, just the sheer amount of stuff that has been done. As each of our organisations has had reduced workforces, has had to grapple with things that you can and you can't do, just that sheer scale of what's been achieved. And I think as well, I think, Gary, you summed it up really nicely, and it touches on the points that Richard and the others made. Is it's in a world of almost like this sort of challenge around trying to support your customers, but also trying to care for your staff. And as you highlighted that they're almost sometimes slightly opposing. The more you want to do for your customers, the more you run risk of putting your own staff under that pressure. So I think it's, to some degree, I almost just think we should just all take a bit of a pat on the back and go, wow, we've kind of coped. The amount of people that have said to me that, we've achieved more in 4 weeks than the last 4 years around technology and stuff like that, I think is a real recognition. So look, having recognised what we've done, I'd just like to start our journey looking forward. And one of the other questions, let me just share this. One of the other questions that we asked the audience, I feel like some famous quiz show now. We asked the audience was around what the 3 top priorities are right now. And I think as we're sort of moving through this, and obviously over the last 3 to 4 weeks, we've started to come out of lockdown. We're definitely, obviously, the number one thing on most people's mind as people is how do we start to plan? So whether we're planning for a return to work or not a return to work, or a full return or a part return to work, and all of those aspects. I think we then move on to that probably more strategic piece. So what's going to happen? How's our strategy going to have to evolve? the panel's already touched on the ideas of what parties e-commerce have to play. How are we going to change what we use? Gary touched on the point around what will his branches become. So the whole strategic direction of some of our businesses is having to change. And then also that long-term planning. I think I come from a finance world, and the unthinkable happened in 2008, and a bank went bust. This was the unthinkable, but now it's happened once, it can always happen again. So I think obviously in the shortish term, we're all preparing for that second spike or third spike, and certainly over next winter. But I think this is going to change our perception to risk across the whole board. So as we start looking forward, I'd love to get the panel's reflections, I guess, on not necessarily what have you decided, but what are you trying to focus on right now? I've heard quite a few people with the expression sort of, we're now at that point where we're trying to take the crisis out of the crisis. We're still in a crisis. It's still all really, really tough, but we've got to start moving forward. We've got to start helping people and helping our staff and getting our businesses back running. So for this one, let me start with Jason on this one. What are your thoughts, Jason? I mean, what's your biggest sort of focus on right now?
So I would say a couple of things. We're in the news a lot at the moment, actually, to your point about risk, which is huge for us and huge for UK PLC, actually, because we've been quite impacted. It was kind of happening before COVID, but the whole Huawei piece around 5G and having Huawei in the network. For those of you who don't know, obviously there was the kind of security implications, and the US government trying to impact our decision in terms of how much or how little Huawei were in the 5G plans. So there's that side of this, because I think the whole COVID crisis has kind of raised more focus on China and the impact of that. I'm not going to get into the political side of it, obviously. So I think there's a big focus for us in terms of contingency planning and not putting all our eggs in one basket. We've taken quite a significant decision as well, strategically, going back to that point about preparing for the future and thinking, what if this carries on? What if we have more of this sort of pandemic situation happening again? And we've taken a big decision to suspend our dividend for the next 2 years, which for us is very significant, because BT is known as a big dividend payer, and lots of pension funds and other kind of organisations that rely on that dividend are very heavy investors in our business. But we've taken that decision very purposefully to say all of that dividend CapEx now will be rerouted into expanding and accelerating the rollout of fibre, because we really want to ramp up our plans to make sure that UK PLC, if you like, is better prepared to deal with this. So there's that strategic side of it. And then on the more kind of, how do we get back to work question, I think in common with probably everybody else around the table, we are looking at how we bring people back to work safely and what that means for us. But I do think, and I do expect, whilst our strategy to move people into regional hubs, which is something that we've been doing for a while now, will continue, and we haven't changed that strategy, I think the way that we populate those locations will change, both in terms of the types of activities we do there and the types of roles and people that we have there. And I envisage a time where it will actually be the norm for people, where possible, to work at home, and going to the office will be more of a scheduled activity to do something specific, whether that's because you're working in an agile team and you need to be co-located, or whether that's, you've got a week of training or meetings or something that is scheduled in. But we're very much working on the assumption that, the office being the default place to work, and remote working being, the flexible side, flip it on its head, really. I think that's probably where we're going.
Yeah, that's great. I'm keeping you on your toes here and changing the order. Richard, can you just touch on yours? I do want to move on pretty quickly to what some of the impact this is going to have on our people, but if we can just quickly run through the other three. Key things for you, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I can be really quick. I think there's the obvious stuff, like we're really focusing even more on e-com than we normally would do. It's been something we've been really going after for the last 2 years, and we'll very much turn up the volume of that. And we've seen, you know, over year to date, we've seen an increase of like 1400% on our e-learning take up as well. So we'll push on those things. Honestly, similar to the points that Jason makes, we still have an eye on our kind of really long-term projects, you know, the kind of 4 to 5 years out stuff. But for me, we've suspended the speculation over the next kind of 12 months, because I don't think we're through the swirl yet to really well enough inform on what's going to happen next. I mean, it feels to me on a weekly basis, we have a game-changing event, whether it be kind of Debenhams recently or, you know, various other things, or return to date or social distancing of schools. So right now, you know, my view is you have to remain pretty short-term executional. And the big thing that we've got as our operating principle is we've invested in our people for years. Now is absolutely time to trust them. So you don't focus on the exceptions to the rule that may try and kind of game the system a little bit. Like 99.9%, I honestly believe, of employees in all business are great and will do the right thing. And we've just got to let them kind of go do their thing for a while.
Yeah, I can see a lot of nodding on the screens at that last point. I think we've had to trust people to work from home. We had no choice, and it's worked.
And what's happened, you know, it's been a great surprise for everybody, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a lovely surprise. Gary?
I think you're asking about impacts on our people. So there's probably two big things I think about when I think about the branch network. One is the upskilling of managing remote teams. So if you wanted financial advice or mortgage advice, you would walk into a branch and you'd be able to get that straight away. Or you could get it by somebody sitting in one of our UK call centres on a high definition TV link from one of our branches. Now those people will be, for the foreseeable, to Richard's point, you know, working from home. But then you ask yourself the question, well, why would you alter that? If your access to customers having financial and mortgage advice isn't restricted by your branch opening hours, why would you change that? And we've rolled out this week video to members at home, to the consultants that are sitting at home, which we used to only have access between nationwide sites. But then you get the situations where branch managers, so across our 663 branches, will be managing teams of people where they're not always in the same location. But so that's a great opportunity from membership. It's a great opportunity for recruiting a more diverse and attracting a bigger skill base, because you're not restricted to locations. But then you have all the mental well-being challenges. And, you know, I kind of think that at the moment we've reacted, I think, really well into facing into this. But, you know, we had weeks where it was a mental health awareness week. And then you move on. Actually, it's going to have to be something that every leader pays great attention to every day for the mental well-being of their team, and something that they do rather than something they do when it's a week that we're focusing on it. And across the society, we rolled out last week a partnership with Unmind, which is a fantastic app allowing people to answer some questions and get their own rating for their own mental well-being, and then come up with some really good actions to support them. And what that tells us as a society, so I can look at my 80 branches and say, actually, there's more anxiety creeping in. So actually, what do I need to step into as a leadership team, and my leadership team, to support that? What might be some of the causes? How can we react to that? But I think the whole scope of mental health and mental well-being, we have to pay a lot more attention to.
Yeah, Gary, we're going to pick up on that in just one moment. But before we do, Alistair, anything to add in terms of your sort of focus? I mean, by the sound of it, you were a little bit ahead because of obviously supermarkets were the first in line. But anything else that you're focusing on right now, looking forward?
I think as we look forward, it's what our key business isn't going to change. We've still got people in stores, we'll still get people in warehouses. But the bit that's going to change is the support service in head office, where we're supporting the front line, as it were. And that's what's going to have to change how we do things. We don't need to have as many meetings. We can actually, people can make decisions. If they're sat beside you in an office, they won't make a decision, they'll turn and ask you. Now what's happening is people are making decisions saying, this is what I've done, is it okay? So I think there's a lot more empowerment. We're trusting, that's a word that's come up several times now. We are trusting our staff to do things. and we are realizing that you can do things differently.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think obviously we've done a lot. You've got a whole load more to do. But I took away from each and every one of your answers that actually your people are going to be absolutely key, aren't they, in order to make all of this happen. And, you know, we've touched on the different impact there. So I'm just going to pick up on one of the other points that we asked the audience. And one of the questions we asked was, what skills, are we using skills in the broadest sense here, but what skills would be most critical to your business going forward? Now, obviously, as the ex-finance person, I'm slightly disappointed in the bottom line answer, but we'll ignore that for the moment. What I think just resonates so much with the conversation we've just had and the inputs is I guess that column on the left-hand side as we're looking at it, adaptability, leadership, that notion of self-leadership, that notion of leadership being dissipated throughout the organization because you've not got one person steering a room full of people. We touched on resilience earlier on, didn't we, around innovation and the importance of communications and teams. So there's going to clearly be a huge shift and change in those skills. And I think what we see is really the buckets of picking up the notion of leadership skills as well within there. So what I'd like to just go through the panel now is what's going to be most important to you? I mean, obviously we've seen what the audience think there, but where are what are you putting most emphasis on those skills right now? And also, how are you going to do that? So obviously, you know, rather than just a skill, but where's that going to sit? How are you going to try and improve it? Because it feels that not only have the skills in your business changed, but also your strategy is going to have to change, which is then going to impact your skills as well. So I'm going to kick off with Gary on this one. Just keep the order fresh.
Oh no. So I guess so. So a thing that I jotted down beforehand was about excelling at relationships. So I guess that could fall into a number of the response areas there, but whether that be, so in our head office departments where they're used to getting squads of people together to work and innovate and iron out a problem, actually they're going to have to do that in a different way now. Whether that's having relationships with customers over the phone or over a video link is different to having them in a nationwide office and being able to show and interact with them in a particular way, or leading people that you don't often see or might very rarely see other than in a little screen or on a remote thing. So I think they excelling at the relationships. I think from a leadership perspective, probably two things. More about leaderships creating the right culture to for their teams to have a go and to flourish, and it's okay to make mistakes and innovate, and out of that will come opportunities and great learning. So much more of that, but actually probably more leaders within the team. So I think it was touched on before, might have been Richard, around about, you know, people doing great things and letting them flourish and have a go. Actually probably trying to develop more leadership in people to have a go, particularly from a risk adverse, typically business in a building society. Actually there might have been less of that, and now actually we're asking them to leap into that almost overnight. So they would, those would probably be the things, Kate. As to how we achieve that, I guess we're already got a variety of transferal of a lot of our development programs onto virtual settings and that now. But I think also some of that will be about the skills that we actually recruit the people. I think we will look for different things in people that we might have done previously when we were recruiting. Which is probably a bit of an obvious thing to say, but yeah, I think who we recruit and what we're recruiting for in a different and more ambiguous, operating in more shades of grey, I think that will come to the fore. And how do we help people manage through a volatile, ambiguous environment? And then, so we talk in Nationwide about 3 E's, so envisioning, empowering, energizing. I think dialing up the envisioning for our leadership teams when it's less obvious what 12 months looks like, or 3 months looks like. I don't know why I said 12 months, what 3 months looks like, 12 months looks like, 4 or 5 years. I think that continuous envisioning skill in all of our leadership population is really, really important.
Okay, that's great, guys. So not only do you need it from the top, but also what I'm hearing is it's that leadership becomes everybody's responsibility as well, or the type of leadership skills. That's great. Yeah. Jason, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, as you can probably take from my job title, skills is my bread and butter. So yeah, all of that resonates with me, particularly the piece about resilience. You know, being absolutely something that people need to be able to cope now in this very ambiguous and volatile environment, and not feel too stressed by it. There's a lot of work that we're doing to support that. But we'd already done a lot of thinking about future skills to support our kind of transformation anyway to more agile ways of working, which tie in very nicely to kind of the changes that we're seeing, the COVID crisis, you know, driving at pace through the business anyway. So we are building into our early careers programs, for example, a set of 5 essential future capabilities, we call them, that we're looking to both in terms of how we attract and select people, but then how we develop them when they're with us. Very much focused around helping them get set up at success in a world where they're going to move around a lot, where they're going to have to work in matrix teams, taking on different roles, working with different types of people, different types of customer. So things like, you know, organizational agility, how well do you really understand our business, how we create value? That's important to help you be able to be effective wherever you happen to work from 1 month to the next. But the biggest thing for me in all of this is the concept of lifelong learning and people really owning their own development. And we look for, in our attraction and selection now, evidence that people are really genuinely you know, interested and engaged in learning and self-development, because the pace of change before all of this anyway was so rapid and getting more and more rapid. You know, people need to be able to respond to that and keep their skills alive, and you know, take the initiative to do that themselves, as well as being supported by us at work. So that's a key one for us.
That's really, really great. And I know we've got some questions coming through, so I am going to turn to those fairly sharpish. But Richard, just focusing on, I guess, this really sort of thinking through this skills point and what the role of leadership is now. What do you see the biggest changes at L'Oreal?
I mean, from my perspective, I think there's kind of 3 things within there, depending on which employee group you're looking at. So I wouldn't for a moment want to kind of downplay the challenge of providing new technical skills for employees. But honestly, that's probably the area I worry about least. If I look at our employee group, there's 2 things that we're really focused on from a L'Oreal perspective, because, you know, we can train up people, we can get those skills. First of all is kind of mental wellness, and I use wellness rather than strength or anything like that. Just coming through this, I think we massively are underplaying the challenge that people are feeling on this. And, you know, I have a number of experiences of that myself. You know, even meeting friends in the street that I haven't seen for a while. I noticed recently, I'd forgotten how to read body language, because I'm used to just seeing people from the shoulder up for 12 hours a day. And it really threw me. It was like, wow, I didn't see this coming. I thought I was fine. So I think there's just a million little things that we're missing. It's not about people having a breakdown. It's about just that gradual degradation of kind of mental wellness. So that's kind of the number one. And the second one is to give people the oxygen to just be able to kind of process and operate. I think it's such a swirl right now. I would prioritize both of those things for our broader population over kind of core technical skills. I think if I look at the management population secondly, you know, the big opportunity here for me is to make sure that every single one of the managers in my UK business has got a core level of competence. And that way we're using the same vocabulary, we have the same experience, and every employee has the same experience through this tough time, but also to springboard into the future, right? And then thirdly, when it comes to the leadership aspect, and I absolutely concur with the guys, that's the big area. For me, it's less the kind of big set piece, here's how you're a leader. Again, it's more, how do we kind of equip them to be the best they can be? So for me, what I'm really trying to do is to kind of flick a switch that provides a more insightful lens for those leaders into their populations. So it goes back to that point I talked about, same storm, different boat. I want to try and build the appreciation of those leaders about what that team's going through. Is it that they're just in the washing machine? Is it that there's other things? Is it that they're struggling back to work? Is it they're dealing with new? That, I think, if you can equip your leaders with that insight, I think you can kind of trust them to be pretty good, because you wouldn't have hired them in, right? So again, it's about how do you let them be the best they can be, in my mind.
Yeah, real focus on the skills needed in order to help people be the best version of themselves. Yeah, that keeping well and everything else. So I think if I've got my bits right, I think I've just got Alistair to cover on this one before we take some questions from the floor. But Alistair, anything particularly that maybe hasn't been raised that's different in your world, or anything particularly resonates?
No, I don't think there's anything that's spectacularly different. One of the things that I think will shine through is the introvert leaders and the extroverted leaders. Now, because we've got this Zoom generation, as I heard it called, we're able to mute people. So those who take over the meetings and their personality shines through, we can now actually see other people coming through and contributing into discussions and to bringing a different skill set than we perhaps traditionally had. And our competency frameworks will need to change to reflect that. And that's the only thing really in changing. So our leaders will need different skills. And I think others have said that. But we've got to harness all the skills and abilities of all the staff, and we'll see different things coming through.
Wow. I love that. I love that muting of people. But I think as well, I think you're right. I think what it's doing is creating a different place, and there's some really positive things out of that. So listen, I mean, there's some just brilliant stuff in there, and I think as I sit and listen to the panelists, although yes, I'm taking check. I'm thinking, yes, we are still in the middle of a crisis, but I think there can be some good to come out of this. I think we're going to see this shift, a much more shift of caring about our people, that becoming a much more key part of our strategy, much more dissipation of those leadership and self-leadership skills much more widely within the organization, rather than just focusing on the top. So Elke, I know you've been carefully monitoring the chat. I can see the eyes darting one way. Any sort of great, I mean, we've got sort of 5-10 minutes to cover questions. What's coming out from the floor?
So there's been a number of questions around a similar theme, which is all around, so I think Gary and Richard, in fact, all of the panelists have mentioned this need for a different set of skills. Richard gave a great example about, now we're having a conversation about art and we're meeting on a more human level. And a number of people are asking questions. So how are you planning to develop your leaders to develop those kind of, and human is my term, but those human connection skills, but also the resilience to take the time and space to do their thinking and to show up as their best selves. So we're sort of getting a picture of what we need and want. The question is how do you intend to achieve it? And that's come from a number of different people in different forms.
Okay, at which point I'm playing auctioneer and looking for anybody that's making any movement as to who wants to kind of volunteer on this one. But even if people haven't got set plans, because I guess at the moment there's still quite a bit sort of working around. Anyone got any thoughts as to maybe some of the things you might be looking at?
I can share a personal experience. So yeah, I would concur. We don't have, I guess, formal plans that have been tweaked with the lens of COVID-19 about how we change our leadership curriculum. I think in my mind, many of the things that you need now are the things that you've always needed from good leaders. It's kind of, I think sometimes in kind of Western societies, we prioritize, technical capability and intellect, whereas for me, I would always value navigation capability and ability to get stuff done over those things. I guess the one thing that's really resonated with me through this is how important it is to spend meaningful time with your leaders talking about principles rather than about rules and tactics. And that's where we've really seen the rubber hitting the road. So sitting down at the beginning, and rather than thinking about, all right, we've got to do X, Y, and Z, like, why are we doing this? So like, what is it about our DNA, our model that we want to leverage? What do we want to turn around? And honestly, if I spend an hour with my leaders talking about the principles versus an hour talking about the tactics, the return I get is, it's 100x, because they literally, they don't need to come back. They then go away and they're informed and they can use their own intellect and brain. And I'd love to tell you that's always been my point of view. It hasn't, but that's definitely one of the things that I take out here of, as long as I can kind of, really be ultra transparent and ruthlessly honest about why we're doing something. And it shouldn't be stuff that, you wouldn't put on your Instagram page, right? It's stuff that we feel good about. But just spending the time to invest in that has amazed me how much benefit we get.
So really empowering people to make the right decisions rather than just giving them a rule book is...
Yeah, I think probably equipping them rather than empowering them, because they really need to understand those principles, and then they can make their calls.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're guessing what we're trying to achieve, it becomes much harder.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. Anyone else want to jump in there? Otherwise, we'll take the next.
Sorry, one of the things I was going to suggest that we need to address is team building. So where we've had traditional team building and even going to the pub after work in your teams and having conversations, that's going to be a thing of the past. So how we get around that different culture and how you build teams to feel part of a team when they're all working remotely, I think that's a real challenge. I don't have any answers to that, but I think that's going to be a real challenge that we need to focus on, because people have still got to have that ownership and be part of that team.
Yeah.
All you need is an 80s quiz night.
Speaks amount of experience there, I think, by Gary, who clearly won the 80s quiz night by the sound of it. Okay, any more questions? I know we want to make sure, obviously, we want to get people out on time, but
yes, a few questions here. And actually, what I think is fascinating about Teams is also how we take in new members to Teams when we're working virtually. So I think there's a whole piece for me around the framework that team operates from and how that happens. So a great question here from Claire, which I think is really interesting. I'd love to hear what guidance or top tips you have for your HR team supporting businesses through this time, because, they're under a different set of pressures and often, and we need and expect even more from them in many ways. So tips for the HR teams or guidance.
all right. So why don't we see if we can get one tip each? Jason.
Yeah, I guess for me, I think somebody's already mentioned this, but it's, within HR, we tend to focus so much on everybody else, don't we? And I think for me, the biggest tip I would give people is focus on their own well-being and making time to, for themselves, and time to keep sane, time to develop themselves, time to, get used to the change, process the change, etc., and not just keep plowing on. I think we tend to be cobbler's children sometimes in that respect. So yeah, make time for yourself.
That's good advice. Gary?
I suppose it would be, and this is because it's come up 2 or 3 times today in a meeting I was in earlier on, is that cognizant of your map of the world isn't everybody else's map of the world. So, we have a comms go out today to all employees about here's things we're doing to equip you for your homework, and all that does is serve to rile my key workers that are in branches. And things like that. So it's this lens on actually operating in a world that has changed, and there are multiple different ways of working and multiple different places of working, because actually what you think you're solving with one thing, you could cause a problem somewhere else. It's a bit like whack-a-mole at the moment. So I would probably say the guidance around, it might just be actually the walking in the shoes of other people. Now, that's fortunate for me, because I go out and do branch visits. I've been out doing branch visits this week, and you can walk in those shoes. I think more of that when you might be less connected to the business, and the same for leaders, I would say. So I shared on a video blog that I do each week last week of the vulnerability of in 20 years of remote management, I've never felt more remote, because I was looking at some colleague feedback and some, we need this or we want this, or anxieties. And actually the fact that I couldn't touch and feel what they were experiencing made me feel extremely remote. So I think that's for leaders as well as HR colleagues.
Right. Any other top tips?
I mean, I guess for me, there's probably not a lot different now than normally. So, you know, there's three things to look for in my team. One is proximity. So get close to your business, understand it. I don't think there's ever been a more necessary time to do that. Two is use that information to have a point of view and be willing to debate it really well, because right now we all need to, I think, to be ultra inquisitive students of both what's going on in society and our businesses, because frankly, anything we knew before has gone out the window in many ways. And the third bit, it echoes absolutely the point the guys are talking about. Give yourself a break. You've got to be really, really clear what good looks like right now. And good is very different from perfect. You know, frankly, if you survive in the day and you kind of move the ball forward a bit, like, I'm good with that.
Yeah, that's great. Alistair, anything to add? Or
just one very quick, and that's common sense. Don't let it go out the window. Nobody's been through it before. We don't know what it's going to be like. So don't be hung up on process, because it's always been that way. Employ a little bit of common sense, and that will go a long way.
Very, very wise words. Elka, any quick?
Well, this might be a yes or a no one.
I like that one.
Yeah, for everybody. And we've had this from three separate people. And the question is clearly everybody's talking about a move towards greater empathy, showing humanity, vulnerability, the shift from good transactors as opposed to good people connectors. Do we believe if we go back to a normal that is closer to what we used to have, that we will still value that? Will this shift be a permanent shift? We're valuing it now, but will this shift to recognizing empathy, vulnerability, humanity, connection? Do you think in our leaders we will continue to value that if we shift back to something that resembles what we had before? And then we should allow people, close.
Okay, this is a yes/no answer, and I know Gary's had to jump off to attend something urgently, but Jason, yes or no?
Yes.
Excellent. Alistair?
I'm actually saying no.
Okay. Right, Richard, you've got the deciding vote.
For me, very much in the main, yes.
Yeah, cool. That's probably, yeah, we all hope. Brilliant. Listen, on behalf of the entire audience and the Ivy House team, I'd like to say a massive thank you to the panelists. I found it absolutely fascinating. I've learned so much around 4 different industries that you don't really appreciate everything that goes on behind them and the complexities. And I think it's really given me food for thought, and also actually quite a lot of optimism. I'm feeling quite positive after hearing this about some of the changes that can come out of this. So massive thank you. Everybody can do high fives and claps and cheers and woohoos in the background. So without further ado, I'm going to hand back to Elka.
And I get to be Willy Wonka for a moment. So, as I said before we ended, sorry, at the beginning, that I get to pull out of the hat 2 golden tickets. Before I do that, I just wanted to add my thanks to Kate, to the panel. Really appreciate you giving up your time and sharing your thinking with everybody. And I think what I take from this, on the one hand, while we're waking up to an absolutely new reality, on the other hand, I think nothing's changed in the sense that people still want meaning, growth, belonging, recognition, progress, clarity, variety, security. And as people in the people business, it's our job to show them how to find new ways of finding that. So just 1 minute on Ivy House before I draw these tickets. We're on a mission. I mean, very, very simply, we're on a mission to put leadership and life skills at the heart of organizations and education. And we do that, as I say, through a range of different programs. But the 2 programs I wanted to draw your attention to right now is firstly our Life Leader program, which is a program that's designed to go across your organization. It can be done very flexibly at low cost. It allows you to touch a lot of people and not get sued for it in a really positive way by giving them these critical skills around resilience and understanding how to use their mind and how to connect with people and lead people on a human level. And then our Master Flagship program, which historically in the old world was an £8,000 program, is now £4,000. It's really for that talent that you know are worth investing in and that you really want to keep within your business. And of course, if you have any questions or want to talk to us about that, please please get in touch. So I think my question for us all as we leave is, and I think before I go to that, is how will we individually ensure that our people come out of this stronger than they went in? And I think that's our role in many ways, is how do we make that happen? Thank you, everybody. It's been lovely to see your faces. Absolutely lovely to see you all. And thank you to our panelists again. And as I say, please get in touch if we can help you in any way. Thank you.